Aloha and welcome to All About Adoption. My name is Christine Altwies, and with me today is a very special guest, Mary Jane M.J. Abe. Welcome.
Thank you, Christine.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
My pleasure. So in our All About Adoption series, we're trying to talk about different aspects of adoption so that our audience can learn all the different kinds of adoption and different ways that we can prepare for children who are either adopted or from foster care and sort of general child development stuff. And your expertise is with
Philippine adoption.
Philippine adoptions, okay. So for people watching, how do you adopt from the Philippines? What kinds of children are in need in the Philippines? Tell us a little bit about the adoption program.
Okay, so we do have a lot of orphans in the Philippines, and we do two kinds of adoptions. You can adopt from an orphanage, and you can also adopt a relative orphan, a young
Okay.
child. There are through the years, children who are available have been, a little bit older than the usual.
So children in the Philippines who come to the U.S. for adoption purposes are generally older.
Right now, yes.
Okay.
I know that there are a lot of families who still want to adopt very young kids, but I noticed that through the years, more and more older children are available.
Okay.
And so the wait for a very young child might take longer.
So it sounds like you're not recommending, if someone is interested in adopting a child or thinking about the Philippines, it sounds like you're not recommending they consider the Philippines if they only want a young child.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
say that. And I'm very lucky that I've had clients who are open to adopting older kids.
Okay.
These kids, the process for these kinds of adoptions take faster. They go generally faster
Okay.
than those who are waiting for younger kids.
So if you want to adopt a child and you're open to an older child, the Philippines program might be an opportunity. Okay.
Yes, it is. We do have a lot of waiting children.
Okay.
And when we say waiting children, these are children who have been cleared for intercountry adoption. Their paper is ready, so if a parent, an adoptive parent identifies and signifies intent in adopting them, then the paperwork goes really fast.
Okay,
and
so
the
what's
process
really fast? Like what's a typical time for?
would be about 1.5 from the time you start with HIC, with the paperwork.
Okay.
But once you've identified the child, it would be about 6 to 9 months.
6 to 9 months from the time you identify a child until
You travel to pick up the child.
So you have to go to the Philippines.
Yes,
to bring a
and
child home.
you only have to stay for a week.
Okay.
And there's a misconception that you have to live there for 2 years when you adopt a child, but that was a long time ago. Before, families would have to adopt from the legal court, the court in the Philippines. And when you do that, you have to stay there for 2 years before you can bring the child here. But now with intercountry adoption, you only have to stay there for a week and then finalize the adoption in the U.S.
So after you come home, the adoption becomes final later.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the children who are in need. Who are the children who need families, and why aren't there families for them in the Philippines?
Well, there are children, a lot of them have been abandoned, and they are in orphanages, and some of them, were orphaned because of the death or passing of a parent. So we do have children who are young, but with some medical conditions.
Like what would be a typical?
Okay, usually delays, developmental delays, like speech delay or some minor cognitive delays, mainly because these children did not grow up in the best, family
So
environment.
children who have unstable beginnings or who don't have consistent, loving, nurturing parents
Yeah.
may develop some delays along the way. Can those delays be compensated for? Can they be made up later on?
Yes, in fact, a lot of our children who came in with those kinds of delays have improved a lot after, a few months of placement. And you can see the major change in them after, they arrive in the U.S. So a lot lot of them are very correctable.
Okay, so
So it
that's the
shouldn't be a big
cognitive.
concern.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. So that's the cognitive developmental delay piece. What about other conditions or other needs that some of these children might have?
Well, there are some children who have emotional problems, like problems with attachment. So these children probably grew up in a very abusive environment. So these children need a little bit more, love and understanding from adoptive parents. So, yeah, we do have children with emotional problems as well.
Okay, and would that be clear up front? Would a parent know what kind of child they are adopting before they commit?
Well, the Philippines tries to give us the most comprehensive reports that they have, although sometimes the reports are not up to date or not current.
Okay.
And so there are some children who came here and manifested some problems, but with proper therapy and intervention, they have shown much improvement.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the things you mentioned earlier that I want to make sure we stress is that if a parent is looking for a perfect child, they probably shouldn't become a parent
I know.
through adoption or birth, right?
Yeah. There's no such thing as a perfect child. That's
Right.
like there's no perfect parent, right? So, yes, they should be open to certain conditions because the less conditions you're open to, emotional, behavioral, physical, then the harder it will be for the Philippines to match a child with you.
So the parents need to be open-minded as to the types of challenges they think they can take on.
Yes, institutionalized children have different kinds of problems. So yeah, it's understood that, or expected more or less that there will be some issues.
So it's expected that any child who's post-institutional will come with some additional needs in addition to the standard childhood needs that a child would have if the child hadn't had that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That condition.
So the prospective adoptive parents need to be open to the idea that they may or may not know what their child may or may not be dealing with.
Yes.
Okay. And when we say that developmental and adjustment challenges can be made up with proper love and therapy, I think we also want to stress that sometimes a child can sort of get back on track, so to speak, with love and therapy, but
Yes.
sometimes
continuous therapy is needed, and adjusting to different children have different levels
Sure.
of coping with stress and new situations. So some of them may be may need lifelong therapy.
Right, okay, that's really important, I guess, to stress, is that we don't want to set anyone up with false expectations of what this might be, that if you're going into intercountry adoption of an older child, sounds like you're saying you need to be prepared for anything.
Yes.
For a child who has adjustment challenges which may be dealt with relatively quickly, or on the other hand, you may have a child who has ongoing needs.
Yes.
And how would you say, in your experience, how have the most successful parents dealt with their children's needs? What have been some cases you've seen where parents have accepted their children who've come over at age whatever, 8, 9, 10, 11, where you've seen really happy cases? And what have been some cases where you maybe saw that things didn't go so well? Can you give us some general examples?
Yes, I can think of some, and these are parents who do not set a very high level of expectation on their children.
They do or they don't set high?
The successful ones, they don't set a very high level of expectation because they know that children go through a certain level of adjustment during the early years. So it's easier for the children to, adjust at their own pace. And those who encounter a lot of problems are the ones who are very like set in their ways.
The parents.
The parents, that's what
Okay.
I'm talking about, yes.
Okay.
And so the children have a lot of difficulty adjusting because it's a big change for them. And so when you put them in a situation where they have to fit in to, you know, whatever their parents expect them to do, then it creates more stress for them and makes it difficult for them to, you know, blend into the family.
So you just said something really interesting. It sounds like, if I can recap, you said the successful cases are the cases where the parents adjust to the child, and the challenging cases are where the parents expect the child to adjust to them.
Yes, yeah, because you know, as parents, you have more life experiences, and you know, more or less should have a better understanding that children will take a little bit more time to adjust to their new family and their new environment. So yeah, that's basically how I things are.
That's interesting to me because I would assume that the parents would be trained before they adopt these children.
Well, they do get training, but you know, each case is different,
Yeah.
and children come with different kinds of surprises and different
Right.
issues. So, but counseling is available. You know, if a family encounters, you know, problems with the child or parenting, then they can always seek the help of our social workers and our counselors at HIC, who will help them, you know, go through their challenges
Who,
with the
who
children.
will support them and give them some
Yeah.
suggestions and guidance.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things that I find interesting about this is that presumably these parents have been educated and they're usually, you know, they really, really want to become parents. That's why they go through this process. And as you said, they're provided with training ahead of time for how to handle a child and some of the challenges and the adjustments. And yet, even with that,
Yes.
you've said in your experience, some of the parents do really well and some of the parents really struggle. What do you think sets apart these different kinds of parents? I mean, is it as simple as they don't understand about adjusting to their child, or?
I think it's about flexibility and openness to, you know, whatever problems that will come up, because some parents think that they can, you know, manage on their own without the help of professionals. And so I know during the training, they're encouraged to seek the help of, you know, either a psychologist or a family counselor. But some parents think that they can do it on their own and try to, you know, manage the problem on their own. So I think that's where the problem begins. It doesn't mean that if you take the parent training that everything will be okay, and I think that's discussed during the classes. So I think it's all about being open to asking help.
There's no
Asking
shame
for
in
help.
asking for help, right? I guess that's it. We're not expecting the parents to be perfect. We're expecting there to be challenges, it sounds like,
Yes.
right? That's part of the adoption journey, is everyone struggles to adjust and figure out what's best. And
Yeah.
if we don't come forward and ask for help, then we don't know that we're necessarily doing the right thing. Okay, that's good to know. What have been some of the children you've seen come over? Have you been surprised by who does well and who struggles a little more, knowing what you know about their backgrounds? Is there any pattern that you've identified with kids who tend to be more successful or more resilient as opposed to others who you kind of identify ahead of time are going to most likely struggle?
Well, I've seen children who I thought would do well, you know, after placement based on the reports that I've read about them, but then they end up with issues, and usually, well, issues are expected, you know, different kinds of issues are expected, but I wouldn't say it's all on the parent, but most of the time issues are with the parents who kind of, you know, put their children in a box, or like have very set expectations about how their children should behave after placement. So, and the successful ones are those who are allowed to, experience what you call this. Successful ones are those who are allowed to be themselves
Okay.
especially during the first few months of placement. They are, still getting to know their family and their new environment. So they manifest some behaviors that are, kind of surprising and not expected by the parents. And the
Right.
parents get disappointed when, the children behave in a way that they didn't expect or picture to
Right.
be.
And I think
So-
often in our moments of weakness as parents, when we're not on our A game, we sort of can tend to feel that when our children act out, it's a reflection on our bad parenting. And that's sort of a downward spiraling mess, because if you aren't doing a good job parenting and your child acts out, and then you say to yourself, oh, I'm doing a terrible job parenting, now I'm going to even get more strict, or I'm going to tighten up on my kid, and then the child rebels more.
Yes.
That's kind of a no-win situation. So I think what you're saying is we need to support the parents in the idea that it can be messy, it can be chaotic, there will be times when everybody looks foolish, but let's go through this together with open hearts and open minds and really try, above all else, to remember that these kids have just had their lives turned upside down.
Yeah.
And pretty much
Like 180 degrees.
180
Yeah.
degrees.
Yes.
And pretty much anything a child does in the context of my life has just been turned upside down is acceptable. Any behavior a child does while trying to figure out what's just happened to them is acceptable. Pretty much, right?
Yes.
I mean, anything from talking back to shutting down to self-mutilation to insolence to not being, a good student. Any of those behaviors would be an appropriate representation of the turmoil that's inside.
That's inside of them. And the parents do not see that. They only see the bad behavior. And so they feel that they fail as parents. So it's all a matter of, I guess, giving your child more time to, figure out these things. And it would help, if as a parent you also seek the help of maybe school counselors or, family therapists. Yeah.
Sounds like what you're also saying is that it's really important to try and go back into ancient history and remember what it felt like to be a child.
Yeah, it
Right?
would help for the parents to do that.
Right.
Because they themselves were children once and went through all that. Yeah. So
Or maybe didn't go through that. Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe
Yes,
some of us
probably.
have had a life that was a little too easy. And so we don't understand the deep anxiety and confusion that can come from having your life turned upside
I
down.
know. Yes.
Right?
That's true.
So a little hardship can maybe make a more empathetic parent.
Yes, I agree.
And maybe also, would you say that understanding child development, understanding what's appropriate at any given age for a child? I guess you alluded to the idea that, at some point we try and figure out who we are.
Yeah.
And that often happens, in your early teen
Yes.
years. And if you're trying to
Adolescence.
figure out, right, adolescence, and you're trying to figure out who you are, and you're trying to, ideally you're separating from your caretaker at that age in a normal developmental scheme, but now you're trying to figure out who you are, you're trying to separate from your caretakers, yet you're also supposed to be bonding with your new
Yes.
caretakers. That's kind of a tough
That's
situation.
a big thing. That's a big thing for the child, and it really turns them upside down.
Yeah. And then you mentioned something about connection to the home country, and we only have a few more minutes, but I guess one of the growing concerns for parents adopting older children, is that children often come wired for sound. They've got connections via social media to their old life. How does that play out?
Well, As parents, I think it's important for them to set boundaries with regards to screen time. I know that the Philippines government, Intercountry Adoption Board helps by making sure that I know these kids long for their Philippine friends, and so the best way to do that would be to be in social media. But there is a 1 year no connection or no contact policy of the ICAB.
Oh,
So
the
it
Intercountry Adoption Board in the Philippines requires that for adopting families, the newly adopted children have no contact for a whole year.
for a whole year with the orphanage or their friends in the Philippines to help them transition better, in their new family and in their environment. So, and I think that helps a lot because you know how children are. Yeah, at a very young age, they know how to get into social media.
Right.
But with that policy, it really helps, the parents in monitoring or having control of the child's ability to, or the child's contact or with social media.
So that rule established by the Philippine government really helps the adopting parents say, this is the rules, we're just following the rules, and it allows the child to really become more present and more attached in the current life rather than living this sort of double life, this parallel life with one foot still in the Philippines socially and trying to understand the new world. And
Yeah, so that really helps a lot. And usually I have clients who have allowed their children to, go into social media after a few years, like of getting adjusted. And as parents, you are the best judge of, when your child is ready. So, yeah, that's basically what's happening with most of my families.
so interesting, this whole new world of social media. It didn't used to be this way. When a child was adopted internationally, the child would leave the old home and come to the new home, and that break was often very traumatic. And I wonder whether or not it's easier or harder now that kids can sort of remain connected to the old life and the old country.
Well, they are able to what you call this, get in touch with under the supervision of the parents, and if they so desire. But as much as possible, the Philippines tries to limit that because they might, it might make it harder for them to adjust to their new family.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow,
So-
this has been very interesting. We just have a few more minutes. I guess I just want to recap then for folks watching, if they are interested in adopting an older child. The process is about 2 years, a year and a half, depending, sounds like.
Yeah, the Philippines has two kinds of waiting periods. Those with Filipino heritage wait shorter.
Right.
Their cases are expedited, so the wait would be about 1.5 to 2.5
Right.
years after ICAB approves your
Right.
application. But for those with no Filipino heritage, it takes about double that time, about
Okay.
3 to 5.
3 to 5, but that's for a
But-
standard adoption. Then there's
Yes.
also all of the waiting children, which is where really your focus has been.
Yes.
The older waiting children who are
And
available and in need of homes.
If you consider a waiting child, then you don't really have to wait because you will be identifying your own child. So from a list that the Philippines sends us, they're able to, pick a child
Right.
or for placement. And
Okay.
if the ICAB agrees with, that it is a good placement, it is in the best interest of the child, then it should go fast, really fast.
Okay,
Yeah.
so lots of children in need, waiting for families. And then you also mentioned briefly, we got to wrap up, but there's the relative adoption. So if anyone is watching and has a relative who can be deemed a legal orphan, either due to death or inability of a parent to care for the child, if the relative is, I think, 4 degrees you mentioned.
Within the 4th degree, but
Within
we
the
have
4th.
had cases where it is beyond the 4th degree,
Okay.
but as long as you can prove that you have bonded with a child, that you have had, a previous relationship, then it's not really impossible
Okay,
to
so-
adopt beyond the fourth degree.
Great. Okay. So relative adoptions, older children are waiting for families, and apparently there are quite a few older children waiting for families, but definitely these should be families who are willing to take on challenges and roll with it and seek help and really get in there and parent with all of their heart and soul.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I've definitely learned something. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's been great. This has been all about adoption. I'm Christine Altwies. My special guest today was Mary Jane M.J. Abe. Thanks to Olelo Studios and our absolutely extraordinary producer, Chris Castagnero. Until next time, aloha.
Something about this feels like home. Something about it already know. And something about this